A woman laughs at a diplomat's joke in a Beirut nightclub, 1962. Her hand rests on his arm. The camera flash captures them together, another scandal for tomorrow's gossip columns. What the photograph doesn't show is the miniature camera hidden in her cigarette case. What the diplomat will never realize is that the actress stealing his heart is simultaneously stealing something far more valuable: his secrets. This is how an Israeli operative became Lebanon's most celebrated film star, how beauty became espionage, and how one woman's face launched the systematic destruction of a terrorist financing empire. The target had a name few outside intelligence circles would recognize. Hassan al-Rashid moved through Beirut's diplomatic corridors with the confidence of someone protected by wealth, connections, and the assumption that his financial operations existed beyond Israeli reach. He held no official position in any terrorist organization. His business card identified him as a cultural attaché. His bank accounts told a different story entirely. Intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv had been tracking al-Rashid's financial network for 3 years. The pattern was sophisticated, but visible to those who knew where to look. Money flowed from legitimate businesses in Cairo and Damascus into accounts in Zurich and Vienna. From there, smaller transfers moved through shell companies before funding operations that left bodies in Israeli streets. The financial architecture was elegant. The purpose was murder. Traditional intelligence methods hit walls. Swiss banking secrecy laws prevented direct access to account records. Surveillance teams couldn't penetrate al-Rashid's inner circle without obvious exposure. Electronic intercepts captured fragments, but never the complete picture. And direct action, assassination or kidnapping, would alert the entire network to scatter and rebuild elsewhere. Someone in Mossad's planning directorate suggested an alternative approach, not infiltration through the front door, but through the bedroom window. The proposal was controversial, even within an organization comfortable with moral ambiguity. Use intimacy as a weapon. Deploy seduction as strategy. Find an operative capable of making a target fall so completely that he would voluntarily hand over every secret while believing he was simply in love. The challenge was finding someone who could pull it off. This wasn't about physical attraction alone. The operation required someone who could inhabit a false identity for years without breaking character. Someone who could manipulate emotions while controlling their own. Someone beautiful enough to captivate, but skilled enough to extract intelligence from an experienced diplomat who dealt professionally with deception. The search led to a theater in Tel Aviv, where a 24-year-old actress was finishing a performance of Antigone. Recruitment officers had been observing her for months, not for her beauty, though that was undeniable, but for something far more useful: her ability to transform. On stage, she became entirely different people. Offstage, colleagues described her as almost preternaturally controlled, capable of projecting whatever emotion the moment required while keeping her true self locked away. Her background made her perfect. Born to Lebanese refugees who had fled to Israel during the upheaval of partition, she spoke Arabic as naturally as Hebrew. She understood Lebanese culture from childhood while possessing complete loyalty to the state that had raised her. And she had something else, a quality that intelligence officers recognized as essential for deep cover work: the capacity for extended isolation. She could be alone in crowds without loneliness compromising her mission. The pitch came disguised as a cultural opportunity: government support for an actress willing to represent Israeli arts abroad. Only after several meetings did the real proposal emerge. They needed her to disappear, to become someone else so completely that even intimate scrutiny wouldn't reveal the deception, to infiltrate Lebanon's elite society and seduce a man whose financial records could dismantle terrorist operations across 3 continents. She asked one question: how long? The answer was honest. Years, probably. Maybe longer. Long enough to build genuine credibility in Lebanese cinema. Long enough to make her cover story unshakable. Long enough that when she finally approached the target, nothing about her would trigger suspicion. Most people would have refused. The psychological cost of maintaining a false identity for years, of using intimacy as manipulation, of living in constant danger of exposure. These were sacrifices beyond what patriotism typically demanded. But she accepted, understanding something that her handlers would only articulate later. For someone who had always felt like an outsider, someone whose family had been displaced and whose identity had always been fractured, the prospect of completely reinventing herself wasn't terrifying. It was almost liberating. Training consumed 14 months, lockpicking for physical access, photography with disguised equipment, cryptography for encoding messages. Combat training focused on escaping, though she learned pressure points that could disable without leaving marks. The psychological preparation proved most challenging. Handlers tested her capacity for emotional compartmentalization through simulated romances and interrogations designed to find her breaking point. Could she betray someone who trusted her completely? While she trained, analysts constructed her legend. They studied Lebanese cinema to identify a plausible career trajectory. Documents were forged, photographs were planted in Egyptian archives, contacts were paid to remember working with someone they'd never met. Her new name carried calculated ambiguity, common enough to avoid attention, but distinctive enough for show business. Her backstory included just enough scandal to seem authentic without making her socially untouchable. A rumored affair with a married director, carefully neither confirmed nor denied. Hints of past wildness that she'd supposedly outgrown. The kind of reputation that made her interesting without making her dangerous. She arrived in Beirut during Lebanon's golden age, when the city genuinely believed itself the cultural capital of the Arab world. The beaches were full. The nightclubs glittered. Christians and Muslims mixed freely in society where sectarian tensions still simmered beneath rather than erupting through the surface. It was a society confident enough in its sophistication to accept an actress with a mysterious past. Her breakthrough came through calculated choices. She took supporting roles that showcased her talent without immediately pushing her into stardom. She cultivated relationships with directors and producers who could advance her career. And she positioned herself exactly where intelligence analysts had predicted al-Rashid would notice her. At diplomatic receptions, at gallery openings, in the restaurants where Lebanon's elite conducted business disguised as pleasure. The first meeting was engineered, but appeared accidental. A mutual friends party, casual conversation about film and politics, nothing that suggested romantic interest on either side, but the seed was planted. Over subsequent months, they kept encountering each other in settings that seemed natural, but were actually choreographed. Each meeting deepened familiarity while maintaining careful distance. Al-Rashid's approach, when it finally came, followed predictable patterns. Dinner invitation described as business, though the subtext was obvious. She accepted with calculated reluctance, projecting just enough interest to be flattering while maintaining enough reserve to seem valuable. The psychology of seduction isn't about availability. It's about creating the illusion of conquest for someone accustomed to easy victories. The relationship developed over 8 months before becoming physical. She understood that rushing would trigger suspicion. Al-Rashid was married, which meant the affair needed careful management to avoid exposure that might force him to end it. She needed him believing he was pursuing her rather than being pursued, and she needed him emotionally invested enough that he would eventually lower his guard. During this period, she gathered intelligence through observation rather than direct questioning. The restaurants where he conducted meetings, the associates who visited his office, the travel patterns that revealed connections to Damascus and Cairo. Everything was documented through encoded letters that looked like correspondence with family back home. Everything was filed in Tel Aviv, where analysts assembled the puzzle pieces. When al-Rashid finally invited her to his private office, claiming to show her his art collection, she knew the operation was entering its critical phase. The office contained what Mossad actually wanted, a wall safe holding documents that could map his entire financial network. She photographed the room during that first visit, using a camera built into a lipstick case. The images went to Tel Aviv, where technicians identified the safe's manufacturer and began studying how to crack it. The seduction required months of patience. She became his confidant, the woman he escaped to when diplomatic pressures became overwhelming. She listened to his frustrations, validated his complaints, and slowly positioned herself as someone he could trust completely. The manipulation was comprehensive. She made him feel understood, desired, and secure in ways his marriage apparently didn't provide. Access to the safe came during an evening when al-Rashid was called away for an urgent meeting. She had perhaps 20 minutes alone in his office. Her hands were steady despite the knowledge that discovery meant torture and probable execution. The safe's combination, which she'd previously observed him entering, opened it on the second attempt. Inside were ledgers documenting financial transfers across multiple countries, account numbers, contact names, transfer schedules, everything that Israeli intelligence needed to dismantle the network. She photographed each page with the camera hidden in her compact mirror, working with efficiency born from hundreds of hours of practice. When al-Rashid returned, she was reviewing his art collection exactly as he'd left her. The intelligence she extracted triggered operations across 3 continents. Banks in Switzerland found themselves subject to sudden regulatory audits. Shell companies in Vienna discovered their accounts frozen by authorities citing money laundering concerns. and operatives who had believed themselves secure found themselves under surveillance that would eventually lead to arrests or assassinations. Al-Rashid noticed nothing. The financial disruptions were public enough that he heard about them, but nothing connected them to him directly. He had no reason to suspect that the woman he confided in, made love to, and planned a future with had systematically betrayed every secret he possessed. The operation concluded with her extraction 15 months after the safe photographs. The timing was deliberate, long enough after the intelligence theft that no obvious connection existed, but not so long that her psychological strain became unsustainable. Mossad staged a family emergency requiring her immediate return to Lebanon. She left with tears and promises to return. Al-Rashid never saw her again. What he did see, in newspapers weeks later, was his arrest on charges of fraud and terrorist financing. The evidence came not from the woman he'd loved, officially, but from anonymous sources that Lebanese authorities found credible. His network collapsed, his assets were seized, his associates fled or were captured, and the woman whose name appeared in his personal diary as the love of his life simply vanished, leaving only questions he would spend prison years trying to answer. She returned to Israel under her real identity, but years of false identity had lasting effects. She struggled with genuine relationships, never quite sure which emotions were real and which were performances. She avoided intimacy, having learned that closeness was something you weaponized. Her operation remained classified. No medals, no public honor, no acknowledgement of the attacks her work prevented. Just a modest pension and psychological support that helped but couldn't entirely heal the damage. In her final years, she began writing. Notebooks filled with memories of the woman she'd pretended to be and the man she'd destroyed, about using your body as a tool while trying to preserve some authentic core of yourself. Those notebooks, discovered after her death, revealed details that intelligence historians spend years trying to verify. They documented an operation so successful it became a template for future honey traps. They also documented a human cost that forced uncomfortable questions about what nations can legitimately ask of their citizens in the name of security. The lessons echo through intelligence doctrine today. Seduction operations work not because of physical attraction, but because of psychological manipulation. They require operatives capable of extraordinary emotional control, and they inflict psychological damage that even successful missions cannot entirely justify. Her story survives mostly as legend. The details remain classified. The target's name is known only to specialists, but the essential truth persists. That beauty, wielded with cold calculation, can be as devastating as any weapon. That intimacy, properly exploited, provides access that violence never could, and that some victories come at prices that even winners spend lifetimes trying to pay. She died as herself. Finally, no false identity, no performance, just a grandmother in a retirement home whose secrets died with her except for notebooks hidden in archives that future historians might eventually be allowed to read. Perhaps that was her real victory, not the intelligence she'd gathered or the network she'd destroyed, but that in the end, after years of being whoever the mission required, she finally got to be simply herself. Though whether she ever truly knew who that was remains an open question that her notebook suggests she asked herself until the very end.